Welcome.
Welcome to the Everything Podcast, and in this episode I'm going to be recapping the Grand Tour Season 1, Episode 1, titled The Holy Trinity, which was originally released on the 18th of November 2016. I'm recording this episode nearly 9 years later on the 11th of August 2025. Before I get on with my recap, here is the Grand Tour Season 1 trailer.
Is your door broken?
No, I'm broken. Can you hold the door for me?
Have you seriously broken your arm?
Well, it's fractured.
Which arm have you broken?
Is there an event on? Is it always this busy?
Wow, Roger Moore isn't here.
Looking good is more important than looking where you're going.
When are you going to do that, mate?
This could be so expensive.
We're going on a road trip in very exotic cars.
Grand touring.
Come on, how does it look to him?
That's to release it, you muppet!
We've only had one minor fire. It's like that Tom Cruise movie.
Cocktail.
What's this, sunshine? It's quite normal.
No, don't play anything else. That was the trailer for the Grand Tour Season 1, and I'm showing you that because in a minute I will be recapping the Grand Tour Season 1, Episode 1, titled The Holy Trinity. But before that, just a big thank you to Chuck for stepping in whilst I've been catching up because of work times and stuff. Obviously I don't have all 7 days to be able to record episodes, and when 2 episodes are coming out a day, it's just not possible for me to always be able to record them all. So thanks Chuck for stepping in. But back to this episode now. Here is my recap of the Grand Tour Season 1, Episode 1, titled The Holy Trinity. Jeremy gives someone his ID card. Jeremy gets on a plane to Los Angeles. Jeremy drives a car. James and Richard are also driving cars. Jeremy, James and Richard get onto stage. Jeremy, James and Richard introduce each other. Jeremy considers doing something. Richard shoots down every one of Jeremy's ideas. A montage of what to expect in the Grand Tour Season 1 is shown. Jeremy introduces the Grand Tour studio tent. A drone is shot down. Jeremy convinces James and Richard to start the episode properly. Jeremy reveals in this episode they are in California. Jeremy spoils that the next episode is in Johannesburg. Jeremy mentions English. Jeremy insults American words for motoring terms. Jeremy reveals the British and American words for some motoring terms. Jeremy quotes George Bush. Richard mentions Americans driving on the other side of the car, driving their cars on the other side, where the steering wheel is. Richard and James list some exceptions when the Grand Tour isn't a car show. Jeremy mentions supercars. Jeremy reveals which supercar is James and Richard's favourites. Jeremy and Richard disagree. Jeremy, James and Richard are in Portugal with their favourite supercars. Jeremy mentions Porsche and McLaren. Jeremy and Richard discuss the McLaren P1 and the Porsche 918. Richard proves Jeremy wrong. Richard is now driving the McLaren P1, whereas Jeremy is now driving the Porsche 918. Jeremy and Richard insult the cars they are currently driving. Richard swears the McLaren P1 scares Richard. Richard compliments the McLaren P1. Jeremy compliments the Porsche 918. Jeremy and Richard lie to each other. Richard believes the McLaren P1 was trying to kill him. Jeremy mentions Downton Abbey and Breaking Bad. Richard mentions James Bond. Jeremy and Richard compare their cars. James arrives. James insults Jeremy and Richard's cars. James drives his Ferrari, the Ferrari. James compliments his car while insulting Jeremy and Richard's. Jeremy believes James is wrong. Jeremy compliments his James and Richard's cars. Jeremy mentions this episode's title. Jeremy mentions the cost of James and Richard's cars. Richard still believes Jeremy's car is trying to kill him. Jeremy proposes a drag race. James reveals his Ferrari, the Ferrari, can't be driven on electricity only. Jeremy and Richard race. Richard compliments his car whilst insulting Jeremy's. Richard beats Jeremy. Richard gloats. Richard proposes that they drive their cars on the road. James reveals he can't drive his car on the road. Jeremy and Richard aren't sympathetic towards James. Jeremy and Richard drive their cars on roads. Jeremy insults James's car. James teases part 2 of that film, still to come in this episode. Jeremy vents about roadworks and bikes. Richard introduces Conversation Street. The audience celebrate the Conversation Street intro. James reveals that he, Rich and Jeremy have already made all the Conversation Street intros for every episode to release in the next 3 years. The audience celebrate this. Jeremy reveals James has been caught speeding. James reveals he was caught speeding going at 37 miles per hour. Jeremy and Richard insult the speed. James interrupts Richard, ending Conversation Street. Jeremy mentions prison. Jeremy introduces the Grand Tour test track. A car drives around the Grand Tour test track. Jeremy reveals what the Grand Tour test track includes. Jeremy mentions James and the English weather. Jeremy names the Grand Tour test track the Ebola-drome. Jeremy drives around the Ebola-drome in a BMW M2. Jeremy compliments the BMW M2. Jeremy compares changing an engine settings to a chef asking you to cook your own food. Jeremy drives around a certain section of the Ebola-drome multiple times. Jeremy mentions the BMW M3. Jeremy describes the Ebola-drome. Jeremy believes the... where am I up to? I've lost my place. I think I found where I might be repeating the same thing. Jeremy drives around a certain section of the Ebola-drome multiple times. Jeremy mentions the BMW M3. Jeremy describes the Ebola-drome. Jeremy believes the M2 is the best M car. Jeremy mentions Silverstone. Jeremy informs James and Richard that the Ebola-drome contains an unexploded World War II bomb. Richard lists what the Ebola-drome includes. Jeremy mentions Amazon and NASCAR. Jeremy introduces the American. Jeremy, James and Richard reveal some of the Americans' views. The American drives the BMW M2 around the Ebola-drome. The American insults the BMW M2. The American also insults Jeremy, James and Richard. Jeremy informs James and Richard that Ferrari won't let them time a car. Richard mentions what the Ferrari can't do due to Ferrari's limitations. The BMW M2 completed the Ebola-drome in 1 minute 26 seconds and 2 milliseconds, 126.2. Basically, so me having to try and figure that out, what that actually means. This proves Jeremy wrong. Jeremy asks Richard to be quiet. Jeremy and Richard compliment the BMW M2. James suggests that they invite celebrities to drive around the Ebola-drome. Jeremy introduces Celebrity Brain Crash. Richard insults the Celebrity Brain Crash intro. James mentions Henry VIII. Jeremy mentions Brad Pitt. Jeremy reveals what Celebrity Brain Crash will involve. Jeremy compliments the RAF. The studio audience boo this comment. One of the audience members insults the RAF. Jeremy, James and Richard hide from the studio audience. Jeremy compromises with the studio audience. Jeremy reveals how the guests will arrive to the tent. Jeremy mentions Bridget Jones. Jeremy Renner is on the way to the tent. Jeremy mentions Bourne Legacy. Jeremy Renner crashes into the desert. Richard agrees with James that Jeremy Renner won't be getting interviewed by them and Jeremy. Jeremy introduces Armie Hammer. Armie Hammer gets attacked by a rattlesnake. Richard once again agrees with James that Armie Hammer won't be interviewed by them or Jeremy. James believes that there might be a celebrity within the studio audience. Richard believes this is unlikely. Jeremy corrects Richard. Jeremy mentions Carol Vorderman and Countdown. Jeremy compliments Carol Vorderman. Richard notices that Carol Vorderman is dead. Richard voices this to Jeremy and James. Jeremy informs Richard, James and the audience that they will attempt Celebrity Brain Crash in the next episode, which is in South Africa. Richard and Jeremy recap what happened during part 1 of the film, featuring the McLaren P1, Porsche 918 and the Ferrari LaFerrari. Jeremy compliments the McLaren P1 whilst insulting the Porsche 918 and the Ferrari LaFerrari. Jeremy reveals how complicated launch control in the McLaren P1 is to set up. Richard reveals how easy launch control in the Porsche 918 is to set up. James's launch control for the Ferrari LaFerrari is similar to Richard's. Jeremy, James and Richard have a drag race. Jeremy nearly crashes. Jeremy, James and Richard repeat their drag race multiple times due to a change in the results every time. Jeremy reveals his new plan. Jeremy, James and Richard believe the fastest car has got to do with shoes. Jeremy mentions the American. Jeremy introduces Jerome D'Ambrosio. Jerome test drives Jeremy's McLaren P1, James's Ferrari LaFerrari and Richard's Porsche 918. Jerome reveals his opinions on the cars. James compliments the Ferrari LaFerrari. Richard insults James. Jerome does a time lap in the Ferrari LaFerrari. Jeremy insults the current speed of the Ferrari LaFerrari. Jeremy mentions gravity. Richard mentions shopping. Jerome does a time lap in the Porsche 918. Richard still has faith in the Porsche 918. Jerome does a time lap in the McLaren P1. Jeremy bets that if the McLaren P1 isn't the fastest, James and Richard can blow down his house. James and Richard agree to this. Richard teases Jeremy. Richard believes Jerome could have crashed. Jeremy admits that all three cars had the same tyres. James admits that Jeremy and Richard have no idea what the lap times are. James mentions the producers keeping the times from the Ferrari LaFerrari did a lap in 1:54.4. The Porsche 918 did a lap in 1:54.2. Richard insults the Ferrari LaFerrari. Jeremy asks Richard to calm down. Richard teases Jeremy. The McLaren P1 did a lap in 1:55.5. This means that James and Richard will blow up Jeremy's house. James and Richard celebrate. Richard reveals he and James are planning on filming them blowing up Jeremy's house. Jeremy attempts to make excuses for why the McLaren P1 was the slowest. Jeremy recaps this episode. Richard celebrates the Porsche 918 being the episode, and Jeremy concludes the episode whilst mentioning the next episode taking place in Johannesburg. And that is my recap of the Grand Tour Season 1, Episode 1, titled The Holy Trinity. As of time recording this episode, I'm in the middle of writing my recap of the Grand Tour Season 1, Episode 2, so that will be coming soonish. Just bear with me because they're like an hour long, so it takes a little bit longer than it does, say, How I Met Your Mother and Neighbours, for example. Back to this episode now. Let me know what you thought of the Grand Tour Season 1, Episode 1, titled The Holy Trinity. If you watched it, my recap. If you didn't, you can be thoughts on both of those in the comments below. As well as anything else you want to cover in the channel, such any previews or recaps, put those in the comments below as well. Remember, you can also like, comment and subscribe, and just remember there are 2 episodes in the podcast released every single day, with the first episode released at 11 AM GMT and the second episode released at 3 PM GMT. Without further ado, I will see you in a future episode of the podcast. See you then. Goodbye.